Hello everyone, welcome back to Navy FODDER. My name is Sache. We have today some amazing gameplay of the last weekend's event, the World War Mode event of the El Alamein scenario. And also we're gonna talk about it. During this last weekend we had the chance to play the second battle of El Alamein, and I think it was kind of a test to see how the new interface, the new layout of the World War mode was implemented into the game, and I think like overall it was a very satisfactory test. So I think they should be ready to bring the old World War mode seasons back into the game. Mainly because I think Gaijin has successfully polished the main issues with this mode, which were the interface and how cryptic this mode was in the eyes of the player, how difficult it was to find a game in this mode, and because you will always remember how the massive list on the left of the screen was filled up with battles and with numbers of different operations, and it was very difficult to get involved in what battles your squad wanted to be taking part into, and it was kind of all over the place. So that has been resolved right now. Now it's very simple and you can follow very easy where your teammates are, and you can switch sides, change operations, find new operations in a more easy way than it was done before. With this, I am not saying that the mode is in overall perfect. With this, I'm saying there's still work to be done, but the current iteration, the one that we tested the last weekend, is much more easier to test and to play. I mean that it's a better platform for you to try this mode, because it's not just pushing you away from the beginning. Because the first thing, the interface is horrible to work with. That has been hugely improved. Again, I'm not saying it's perfect now. I'm saying that, as we pointed out in our previous video, they could be made a little bit easier for the single player, and you should get a little bit more info out there to make it easier to know what the time objective of every single mission is. Because unless you put like a big massive cycle, players don't know if they need to kill like players or they need to kill the AIs in order to win the scenarios. What I'm trying to say here is that you need more than just the little icon on the bottom left of your screen or the timer there to point you out what the mission is. You need to make it clearer for the player to know what the objectives are. You can just, anytime you join a battle, you have a big massive letters in the middle of the screen that are telling you what do you need to do in order to achieve the objectives of the battle. This is one of the biggest issues that I found while I was playing this weekend, and yes, it is important, because if you don't know what you are playing at, you cannot feel like you are making an impact in the overall outcome of the scenario. And it is big because when you are on the squadron that has created the operation, you cannot go away from the operation. You have to fight till the end, or till there are no more chances to win the scenario, and then you start playing it. But as a single player, you don't have that motivation. So you need to make it clearer for the single players and for the smaller squadrons that join randomly a certain operation, that they have an impact in the overall outcome of that certain operation. And this happened along the weekend. I was more than able to feel that my actions, and if I did well in a certain battle or in a couple ones, I was helping the side that I picked for that certain operation, and that felt good. But what I'm telling here is, until you get to that level, you need to know all of the interface, how to pick your battles, considering what is the objective of that certain battle. If I'm gonna be able to do it, if I'm gonna be able to help by trying to achieve that certain objective, and to be able to get that knowledge, you need to get a few games in the bag, and that is me saying it. And because I mean I've played this before, so I roughly knew what I was getting into. But a completely new player might have a much difficult time in order to find out what the objectives are because of the lack of information, and that is what sends people, players, back into the random queue, and that is a failure in my eyes. Because if we put this mode into perspective, we could see that this mode is been the last time that we were able to play this. It was more than 2 years ago. So that means that Gaijin has been working on it during this time. It doesn't mean that they have been like 24 hour, 24/7 working on this, but they have put some amount of time, some amount of work into this. And to think that players are choosing not to play this over the random queue after the amount of time and effort that Gaijin has put into this mode, it's just a shame in my eyes, because this will get into, you know, the trash bin along with the enduring confrontation. But it is a little bit too early to spell doom on this thing. So we will wait and see what happens whenever they do, like they used to do, like nearly a full month of World War mode scenarios. And in regular rotation, we'll see how the player base reacts to that. All in all, I think this kind of weekend test, it was a successful test, because I'm sure this gave Gaijin a lot to think about and so much info. But before I continue, I just want to say that I had a wonderful time playing this, and I think that the people that I played along with, they did have a wonderful time as well, and that I'm looking forward to play more of this, more of the kind of World War II scenarios, and especially I'm very hyped to see what they can do with the naval engagements, especially on the World War II time period. One of the things that I didn't like from the mix of vehicles and how they arranged the groups in the strategic level, and those reflect into the battles, was, for example, the fighters. And it seemed that there was only one choice, and it was the best one, the Highgers BR plane. And yeah, in that case, that was the British, the Spitfire, the Mach 5C, and for the Germans, the 109, the F4. The other options were just not as optimal. You could play them, and I did play the Hurricane, like during all of the event. I only had a few games with the Spitfire, to try and see how much difference in, you know, in effectiveness there was between the two aircraft inside this mode. And yeah, I end up playing the Hurricane all day long, but that's just me. And it feels like when the players went and saw what was available to them, they were always trying to get onto the Spitfire and onto the F4 because of obvious reasons. But in a mode like this, in my opinion, I think there should be the different models that were present in this second Battle of El Alamein or in any other scenario, they all should be represented. And yeah, that's not the case, because once the player base recognize that one vehicle is better, they're just gonna go for it. That is why these sort of events, these scenarios are done in a shorter span of time. And that is because they don't want to give you enough time to grind the best vehicles for you to exploit every unique scenario. That is just, in my opinion, bad design, and not wanting to get into the, you know, trying to balance this a little bit by creating different groups of aircraft into this scenario or in any other scenario of the World War mode. But if we look especially into this one concerning the lack of diversity, if you keep this scenario long enough to exploit what in my eyes is a flaw in the design, we just need to look how they were organized for this specific scenario. So if we look into what the British had available on October 1942, right before the Second Battle of El Alamein started, we can see that they had two different groups of fighter aircraft, because the bombers are not a problem here by design, in my opinion. So they have the number 211 and the number 212 group. So in order to try and fight the possibility of having a diversity problem when we talk about fighter planes in this Second Battle of El Alamein, if players try and exploit and always field the Spitfires Mark V, and there would be, I would suggest two different things. One, divide the one and only fighter group, fighter crew slot that we have into two different ones, making one like in here, like the number 211, and the second like the number 212. Being the first one, the one with all of the possible options, and making the second one just with Hurricane. This creates two different pools of fighter aircraft, and also so you have two different crew slots for fighter aircraft, giving you more plasticity, giving you more options, while we also are trying to be historically accurate by maintaining the proportions of in which these aircraft were found at this particular battle. The second thing that I would suggest for this specific scenario is that you just cannot make disappear the P-40. There's got to be a way to include an aircraft that was in more numbers than the Spitfires. I do understand that to include the P-40 in this scenario, you will have to include the United States inside this particular scenario. And if you look into all of the different ones in the World War mode, you can see that there's only two nations involved in every single one of them. There's not more than two nations involved in any single scenario of the World War mode. So I assume that they need to, go into the CDK and create another nation for every single map that is portrayed in every single scenario. And for example, in this case, there are nine different kinds of battles that you can play with several maps involved. So that's a considerable amount of work that you need to do just for the sake of historical accuracy. But yeah, more on this later on. And what about the German fighter planes? Well, I do suggest to do exactly the same as with the British, to divide the fighters into different crew slots, into different groups. One having all of the models, and a second one having the emils, having the E3, the E4, and the premium, just on that group. So moving on to the next point, if we take a look into the composition of the infantry and of the armored elements of this scenario, the main differences between them were what you could expect, the number of units in them, and the composition of them, meaning that you had less tanks in infantry than you would have on an armored division, and that makes sense. And then the composition in the British, you couldn't field any of the heavy tanks, any of the heavy crews, and then on the Germans you could basically field all of the very same units, apart from the more lightly armored Panzer IIs, which, I don't know, it doesn't make much sense in my head. So this kind of setup with time will evolve into the similar scenario as with the aircraft, in which you will find that certain units are nowhere to be seen, and thus because in their groups there is a much better option. This in turn can be done in two different ways. Can be done by changing and going back to the system where you just keep track of the number of vehicles left one by one, which we've done that before, as I said, and yeah, we've ended up with this kind of group system, which in my opinion is much better. And for the diversity's sake, and to avoid the exploit of only using the best units, and also to further diversify and to further increase the differences between the different divisions, the infantry and the armored divisions, and also to make sure that all of the units that were present in this scenario are represented as well in game. So for this scenario, for example, for the Germans, if we look into the differences between the infantry and the armor, basically the armor did have Panzer IIs, but the infantry didn't have any. And the infantry, they had the same, all of the groups apart from the Panzer II, but they just had not many numbers of them, which kind of makes sense. But also the lightest unit, which is the Panzer II, wasn't represented on the infantry, while you have much heavier units like the Panzer IVs, and in my eyes that doesn't make sense. But then the armor representation, the armor division was very nicely done and historically accurate. The main problem with the Germans, in my opinion, was that the SPGs should have been divided into two, in my opinion, and one that has all of the options available for the armor division, and for the infantry, the SPGs should only have, the artillery piece, the 15 centimeter artillery piece, and then the half track with the pack on top of it. And for the British to further differentiate between the infantry and the armor divisions, what I would do is maybe leave the Stuart 3, the Crusader 3 and the Sherman 2 only available for the armor division. And moving on to the next point, I really think that this mode is such a missing opportunity from Gaijin to include infantry in the game, and because it's already done, we just need to create the triggers in the maps so they can, move around, attack units, cap points, do whatever you want them to do. I do understand that that's more work to do, but it would be such a nice thing to do, especially when you are playing with infantry divisions on a map, let's say. So yeah, that would give many tanks purpose, and those HE rounds will be more usable and things like that, and light tanks will have another purpose. For example, another thing that is misrepresented on this mode, and is such a pity, is the artillery. Germany does have the 15 centimeter pieces in its lineup, but for example, the British don't have any, and this really is such a missing opportunity to have the bishop to come into the game. It was used in this particular battle, and it was done in more numbers than, for example, the 15 centimeter artillery piece of the Germans. This could have been such a good opportunity to give the bishop, for example, as a reward, or maybe that you need to grind playing this event in order to unlock it. It could also open the gate to include the bishop and the 15 centimeter artillery piece of the Germans into the actual artillery division that is on the map, in order to give that particular division an use if it actually gets into battle, rather than just getting bombed on the air defense or the air raid mission. It could also mean that maybe the artillery could be used as a reinforcement for the ground units, because it will grant extra anti-air and extra artillery into the already existing pool of vehicles in any particular battle in which an artillery unit comes into play as a reinforcement. Apart from the bishop and giving the artillery meaningful pieces and differentiating them from the self-propelled guns, there are other vehicles that played an important role, and they are missing. They were the P40, as we have mentioned before, and the M7 Priest as another artillery piece that could get into, the game very nicely. And then we have the Baltimores, which are very similar to the French bomber, the Martin 167. This is the Baltimore 187 DA3, a vehicle that saw extensive use, and it was deployed in important numbers during this battle. And last but not least, the Leichter Panzerspielwagen 222. This particular model is pretty much the same as the 221. It just have the chassis have been modified. It has 3 crew members and the 20mm autocannon as the main armament, and also a MG34 on top of the turret. All in all, these vehicles, some of them I really think they should be in, and the others are kind of just to add some flavor and to make this scenarios, something to look forward to, just to play those very niche vehicles that otherwise you would never see anyone playing in the random queue. This also leads to, I think that just giving one simple decal is nice, but maybe you could, up your game a bit and try and give the players that are involved with an event like this some historical camos that include markings so they can personalize even further their vehicles, and of course that are exclusive, that you can only obtain exclusively by playing these kind of events. So let's talk about the big elephant in the room, shall we? So when you are presented with an image like this, you can only think like, where are all these people? Where are all these, the Australians, the Scottish, the New Zealanders, the South Africans, the Indians, the Greek, the Frenchies, and of course the Italians. So if we look into the Allied side, we can see two different things, that all the different nations are inside infantry brigades or divisions. So the majority of these divisions were using, British uniform and using British equipment, and that is why I believe Gaijin has just, simplified it and just said like, well, they're all British. And then if we look into the Axis side of the engagement, we can see that the Italians had not also infantry, but armored divisions, motorized and mechanized. We could argue that the Ariete and Vittorio are proper armored divisions, but the Trieste in here, it does show like it's a mechanized division, while I believe some people will call that a fully armored division. By the way, this is all from the Wikipedia and I'll leave the link below. So because we have the armored units to represent these Italians that were not just infantry but also had armored divisions that we can easily portray in the game because we have all of those vehicles already in game. But not only that, it's just because mainly one cannot really understand the North African theatre, the North African engagements that occurred during the World War II without the presence of the Italians, because they played a major part on the engagements. That is why I think this could be a pretty sensible thing to ask to Gaijin to try and solve for the future iterations of this scenario. So please Gaijin, get Italy in, please. And now we're just gonna play a little game. We're just gonna think about like, if Italy was inside the scenario, what would the scenario look like? So let's check what the initial deployment, the initial historical deployment was, and compare that to what Gaijin has given us to see if we can find out what criteria did Gaijin followed to create this scenario. So what we are gonna compare is the amount of little men and little tanks that we have on the Gaijin map, and compare that to the historical deployment. Bear in mind there's some initial reinforcements for the Axis side that is not represented on the map, which if I recall correctly, it is 4 armored divisions which align very nicely with what we have historically with these 4 here. And then we have these 2 units here that I don't know where they come from. So if we compare the 2 images with these 2 things in mind, we can come to the conclusion that Gaijin has chosen to ignore whatever is below their division. So any regiments and any brigades are not represented here. The brigades, the one with just the 1 cross on top of the icon, and the regiment, the one with the 3 lines. And now we're just gonna paint with the green color the units that should be, Italian. And this, in my opinion, is a much nicer, a much more interesting scenario to play. But what would it be, the vehicle selection, and how would the Italians be arranged into groups? So these are the units that were involved on the Italian side during the second Battle of EL ALAMEIN. This is what I think is correct, but I might be mistaken, so if I am, please let me know in the comments below. So for the light tanks, we'll have an armor card and then a little tankette with a autocannon, which will be very useful. And then the medium tanks divided into two groups, like with the Germans. And these are gonna struggle, I believe. These are gonna be tough to play because they lack of penetration and mobility. They're gonna be good if they can get into, places like hills and all that, because that's playing to its advantages. But then, yeah, that's not gonna be always the case. Then for the SPGs, in here I would say that the Lancia and the Lancia and the M41 are the ones for you to look forward to, especially the M41, because, it's armored, so it will be better protected. Not much, but it will be better protected than the Lancia against aircraft. So these two will be your main bread and butter, because will be the ones that will be able to penetrate the Sherman tanks and the Churchills, which are going to be the two that are going to be most difficult to penetrate. And for the aircrafts, the C-200s and the 202, which will be amazing to fly against the British. The bomber options would be the Sparviero, the legendary Sparviero, and the Alcione. There's a lack on CAS, on ground attack role aircraft, but such was the situation for the Italians in this scenario. But then again, in a list like this, I believe that you would end up seeing always the very same tanks, not seeing the whole array of tanks that were used. So in order to be a little bit more representative, we could try and do as we did with as we said before, with the Germans and the British. With the ground vehicles, we would try to differentiate between the infantry and the armor division, giving the infantry the lighter units and giving it 4 different groups. The scout group with just one option, light tanks with just the one, SPGs with 2 very light options, and the anti-air. And for the armor division, you will have the 2 medium tank groups and the very 2 SPG useful tanks for the Italians, and again the anti-air option. So, and for the aviation, we'll do the same. We'll try and divide the fighter groups into 2, one with all of the options and the best one, and another one with the less favored option, let's say. With the bomber groups, we'll do the same. Spavieros in one group, and then the Alcione in another. This way we differentiate between the units, we make them unique, and also they play differently. All in all, I think it would be very interesting to play as an Italian player, very difficult and challenging as well, rewarding. Why not? Whenever you are able to, get a victory. But remember, in this scenario, the victory is awarded to the Axis if they control one of the 3 hexagons, objective hexagons. So it's kind of, I'm not gonna say easy, but defending is always, in my eyes, easier than attacking. Another thing that is kind of annoying is the replayability of the whole scenario. And if you look into the strategic level, if you look into the main strategic map, it's kind of very difficult to have 2 scenarios that play the same. But then the battles, the missions are gonna be the same kind of over and over again. It's just the matter that you're gonna be playing the same 9 to 13 missions all the time. So that's why I think the rotation is a very good thing for Gaijin to try and to implement on this kind of game mode. But there should be a little bit more randomization within the missions. And with this I mean that the placement of the anti-tank guns could be a little bit more randomized. Even the spawns for the teams, the captured areas, and especially the routes of the convoys. They should change a little bit more from one battle to another, because they always follow the same route. There's slight changes when, when there's one unit that is destroyed and then the following units have to go around. So, the path changes on those units. The whole route could be placed on a different part of the map, and thus changing the mission a bit. And with the anti-tank guns, it's very possible, it's very easy to kind of, once you've played a certain mission, it's very easy to kind of remember where the placement of those anti-tank guns were in the map. So next time you play it, you just need to get closer and just drop artillery onto that specific place that you remembered, and you're gonna get kills. And it's just defeating the whole purpose of the anti-tank guns, and it's kind of a lame tactic, but it's effective and easy to do. And the last thing that I think that I'm gonna be pointing out here is that the map and whatever you play whenever there's a battle, it seems like it's not connected, because it doesn't matter that the map that there's like a town in that particular hexagon. Maybe you will be playing on a completely flat area, or if you are over the ridges and then you are playing on a map that has two villages, for example. So with this, what I'm trying to say is that maybe if you don't want to reflect every single hexagon carefully whenever it translates into a battle, I'm fine with that, but maybe there's a few key hexagons that should be, that those maps should translate into a very specific map in the battle. So for example, if you are playing in a town, they should translate into a map containing a town, and the town is maybe the centerpiece of that map, and things like that. And before I forget, yeah, the Osketten are really nice, but I don't think the German tanks should have the Osketten, for example, in the second Battle of El Alamein. So maybe some modifications are just not right to have them in certain scenarios. So you can call me that I'm a little bit picky, but if you are trying to be, making historical scenarios, well, you might as well keep it all kind of historically accurate. So yeah, I think that wraps it up, and yeah, well, thanks for watching, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed this rant, and please let me know what you think about getting Italy involved in this scenario in the comments. And if you have any other suggestions, just leave them in the comments as well, and we can talk about it. But yeah, that's me for today, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, guys. See ya.